Hey everyone. In today's video, I'm going to comment on a series of medieval tapestries called The Lady and the Unicorn. This is one of the most famous works of art from the Middle Ages, and as usual, we're going to talk about the history of the work, how it was made, its technique, and how it can be understood today. So I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, you will find links to other ASMR videos I made about works of art in the description. To begin with, let's have a look at the tapestries. There are 6 of them, and each one represents a different scene with a woman and an unicorn standing on what seems to be a floating island on a heavily decorated background saturated with flowers, plants, and animals. In no particular order, we have a first scene with the woman holding a pennant and touching the horn of the unicorn. In a second scene, we have a maid presenting a dish of sweets to the lady. She has picked one and is apparently giving it to a bird near her hand. The unicorn on our right and on the left side of the lady. We will see that the unicorn is always on her left side in every tapestry, is present and holding up another pennant. And there is also a lion to the right of the lady, like in the first tapestry we saw before. The third scene represents the lady sitting, and she is holding a mirror with the unicorn watching its reflection in it. In the fourth tapestry, we have the lady playing music on a small organ on top of a table, with her maid standing to the opposite side. And once again, the lion and the unicorn are present, framing the scene with the pennants they hold. Then we have the lady standing, and her maid presents her a basket of flowers. And finally, in the last and largest of all these tapestries, we have the woman standing in front of a tent. This is the only one with text, and if we look at the writings on the top of the tent, we have a sentence in French, à mon seul désir, which means literally, to my one desire. These tapestries are more than 5 centuries old. They are not dated precisely, but we know they were woven somewhere in Flanders. The region of Flanders historically corresponded approximately to the western half of Belgium today, and they were woven by the end of the 15th century or the beginning of the following century. And since they were rediscovered in the 19th century, they have fascinated generations of art historians, not only for their quality, but also for their mysterious meaning and the abundance of interpretations of symbols that can be found in them. This style of tapestry, saturated with decorative elements, mainly plants, flowers, was very popular in the 15th and 16th centuries. It is called the mille fleurs, literally 1,000 flowers style. But the art of tapestry is much more ancient than the Middle Ages, since the antiquity in ancient China, in Greece too, we know that tapestries were woven. They were unique pieces and entirely handmade. And in the Middle Ages, in particular, owning a tapestry or even more, a series of tapestries, was a sign of considerable wealth, because commissioning such a work that could take several months or even years to make was limited to a tiny elite of powerful and wealthy people, so that fancy tapestries could only be found in the treasures of cathedrals or big churches and in the castles of kings and very wealthy families. And this is the case for this one. This series was commissioned by a wealthy French family from the second half of the 15th century. The exact identity of the commissioner is uncertain, but we know he was a Leviste, a family that played a prominent role at the royal court during this period. All the pennants represented in each scene that we've been looking at before bear their arms. When a new tapestry was commissioned, one or several artists were recruited to draw the designs, the cartoons as they were called, and only after the weavers would reproduce that in the final tapestry. So the making of tapestries involved many different workmanships, from dyers to spinners to weavers, and it could take months, if not years, to complete a large-scale work of that kind. We can see parts in The Lady and the Unicorn where cartoons have been reused, mainly for decorative elements. For example, animals. Sometimes the cartoons were reused inside out. The most mysterious and ambiguous tapestry of the series is probably the last one I showed you, the one called À mon seul désir, to my one desire, because the 5 first ones are generally seen as representations of the 5 senses. We have touch, with this scene in which the lady is touching, holding the horn of the unicorn. We have hearing, with the musical scene. We have smell, and in this tapestry we see that a monkey has taken a flower and is smelling it, giving the key to the reading of this scene. We have sight in the scene with the mirror. And finally, taste in the tapestry with the dish of sweets. But symbols are not limited to this representation of the 5 senses. If you pay attention to the animals everywhere, you see that they often go by 2, and they generally oppose in nature. One is the prey, the other the predator. But in these scenes, it seems that everything is harmonious, and forces that would oppose in nature are now living together in harmony. The presence of the unicorn, a mythical animal often associated with purity, with virginity, also gives a sense of fantasy, of perfection to these scenes, as if it was like a representation of paradise rather than scenes from reality. And the observation of the ladies confirms this. They are covered with jewels, very fancy clothes, and it was very uncommon, almost unthinkable back then, for a real woman to go out or be represented without wearing something on her head. These ladies, in each of the tapestries, the way their hair is done seems to indicate that they are not real women, but rather allegories themselves or mythical figures. Actually, in the Middle Ages, when women were represented without having their head covered, this generally indicated that they were goddesses from the antiquity or mythological figures. And this is what we have here. We may lose this sense of fantasy looking at these tapestries 5 centuries later, but for people that watched them at the end of the 15th century, it was obvious that these scenes were representations of paradise, were allegories, scenes of mythical perfection in a lush and peaceful environment. Opposites are reconciled and purity shines. But this leaves the 6th tapestry, the one called To My One Desire, which is far more ambiguous and difficult to read. If the first 5 tapestries represent 5 senses, then the 6th one could be a representation of a 6th sense. This is sometimes the name that we give today to some sort of intuition, but back then the 6th sense, if there was one, was considered to be understanding, reason, the capacity to think and figure things out. In that case, the sentence, my one desire, which is as ambiguous in French as it is in English, could mean by my will alone. I have managed to control my senses, including the 6th sense of understanding, and this gives me access to another state of conscience, of wisdom, of empowerment over the forces of nature. But much ambiguity comes from the fact that we don't know whether the woman is entering the tent or coming out of it. We don't know neither if she is taking a necklace from this box that the maid is presenting to her, or if she is putting her jewels inside the box, abandoning them before entering the tent, if she is removing her jewelry and possibly undressing before entering the tent. This may represent the loss of her virginity. You may know that unicorns were often associated with virginity. They were supposed to be attracted to virgin women, and the unicorn is present in the scene, suggesting that the woman remains a virgin. But in that case, she may be about to get married and lose this virginity. This means that the sentence, my one desire, could come from her husband. She's about to belong to him, and she is her husband's desire. In that case, we could imagine that this series of tapestries was actually a wedding gift offered by the husband to his bride. And this would fit well with this chivalrous or courtly vision of love that was so popular in the Middle Ages in Western Europe. This courtly love was more a literary genre than anything. I'm not saying it clearly reflected the real situation of women, But in this vision of love, love was idealized, and women were put on a pedestal because supposedly love was the prerogative of women, and it gave them power over even the bravest of men. This conception of courtly love, in which women dominate everything when it comes to feelings, to love, and can impose anything they want to men that would sacrifice themselves once they have fallen in love with a woman, is something that has become old-fashioned later on. It was probably too stereotyped and far from reality to survive as a literary genre, but it never entirely disappeared. Maybe even today in popular culture, in romantic love stories, in fairy tales, there is still a little bit of this courtly love conception that appeared in the Middle Ages, and maybe actually the theme of these tapestries. As always, I hope you enjoyed this moment, and I will be waiting for your comments and suggestions in the comment section below. Thank you very much for your time. I'll see you soon. Au revoir.